All right. Well, good afternoon,
Good
everyone.
afternoon.
I'm gonna. I am just thrilled this afternoon to be in the presence of some amazing men, some amazing people, and I'm looking forward to this getting started. But before I do, I want to introduce one of my team members. Connie St. John is going to be helping to facilitate the discussion, and I'm happy that she's here to help us with this, and she'll be facilitating questions. In fact, Connie, if you want to give a few things to our listeners in terms of helping them process logistically their questions and what have you.
Absolutely. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this wonderful Zoom webinar. This is Dr. Joshua Speaks monthly panel, and we're so excited. It is Black male teachers making a difference, and we have 4 amazing Black male teachers from elementary school all the way through to college and beyond. So Dr. Joshua will introduce all of the speakers in just a moment. But I want to mention that there will be questions at the end, so feel free to put your questions in either the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll either answer them live, as many as possible, or if we can't, we'll try to put an answer into the Q&A for you. But feel free to talk back and forth in the chat. There's a way in the chat that you can direct your questions to all panelists only, or to panelists and attendees. And I will say that the attendees always look forward to reading your questions. So feel free to select all panelists and attendees so that people can see your comments and your questions and things like that. So this panel is typically held the first Tuesday of the month. Last month's panel was amazing. If you haven't seen it, with Black male pastors talking about racial injustice and how they respond, you should take a look at that. It's on YouTube. And the next panel will be held on September 1st, and it is going to be yet another powerhouse panel. So make sure you sign up to register to attend that one, because they are going to just keep getting better. Everyone is phenomenal. So with no further ado, please welcome Dr. Joshua Smith, who is the founder of Dr. Joshua Speaks. He is the founder of the Solomon Center for Hope. He is the lead pastor at Zoe Christian Fellowship of Whittier, and he is a professor at Biola University. Welcome, Dr. Joshua.
Thank you, Connie. I wanna. There's so much I want to say, and I wanna say there's some wonderful things I want to say about each of these men here, and I'm of course going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves as well. But first, let me give you the inspiration for this panel: Black male teachers making a difference. What inspired it was a couple of years ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I was teaching at Biola, and a couple of students of African descent who I'd had in class had come up to me, and they decided to share some information with me. I hadn't heard from them before, and they told me that I was the first Black teacher they had ever had. And they just made me just pause and think about that. They said, yes, you're the first Black teacher I've ever had. And I'm teaching college. I'm teaching at a university. And so I was struck by that. And then one of the students actually began to weep, just pondering about the fact that I was the first time he had encountered a Black teacher. And it struck me in a couple of ways, because on the one hand, I was touched. I was just moved. I was just like, wow, how am I a part of this experience? And then another part of it was not resonating with me. And I thought, well, what's going on? And I remembered that was not my experience. In elementary school, I had 3 Black male teachers, 3 African-American males, and that was just normal for me. And so, of course, one of the people on this panel is my own first grade teacher. The first African-American I ever had as a teacher in school is sitting here, and I'm so excited. So I had to create this panel, if nothing else, but to have him on so we can talk. And so I'm gonna talk about him first, and then I'm gonna talk about the other panelists. So it's hard for me to call you by your first name, but I will, because we're grown-ups now. I'm a grown-up now. But I've always known you as Mr. Richardson. I'm gonna call you Rudy at your request here. Yes. But Rudy, you were amazing. I only have positive memories of you. And let me just say a few things. Like, I remember, well, first of all, you were an amazing teacher. You taught us music, and one of your highlights was that you played with us at recess. I don't know of any other place in the world except at First Christian Day School in Compton, California, where kids played sock ball. Never heard of that game before. If you never heard of it, basically it's some kind of adaptation of kickball and baseball where you would literally sock the ball with your hand. And you would play with us, and we just had a ball. And so I remember the songs you taught us, the lessons you taught us. You had all this youthful energy. You would race with us. And I was just moved. And, you know, I hadn't put it together, but like, wow, I eventually became a teacher. And it just, to have you there as one of my first teachers, the impact it had on my life in terms of doing that, I just can't say enough about that. So thank you for that. And I'm going to give you a second to talk about what you're doing now in a second. I want to go to the other panelists here. The other panelist here is Seyto James. Wow. Well, we go to the same church, of course, but you are, brother, I've had a chance to see in action in terms of your capacity to teach young people. So I know you're an elementary school teacher, but first of all, our kids are involved in a program, an extracurricular program, where you're also involved in some level of teaching. And I've watched you engage with the kids and the way you get their attention, but not just how you get their attention, the way you care about them specifically. And what I know for sure is that the experience I had with Rudy Richardson here is the same experience that they're getting with you. And I'm so excited about that. I'm so excited my boys have been exposed to your teaching. And the stories you tell about your kids in elementary school, I'm inspired by what you do. So thank you so much for being here. You're also you participate with your wife, Dr. Christina James, in a parenting training program, which I've been a part of. So thank you so much for that. And I'm looking forward for you sharing more about what you do. And then, of course, DeMetrius Holmes, man, my college buddy, man, I met you freshman year at UCLA. This was before the first quarter of the year, and we were in this freshman summer program. My parents are driving up, dropping me off, and I'm unloading my bags, and there you are. You see me. You say, you know what, let me help you. And we have this conversation, and we discover that we have roots in Linwood, California. We start talking about that. And you start telling me about you're going to marry your high school sweetheart, and you're going to be a teacher, and you're going to do all those things. Do you know that everything you said, I mean, you got this amazing family. You are this amazing teacher. I see what your students tell, how they admire you on Facebook. And you have a heart of gold. And I'm so looking forward to the nuggets you're going to share today, along with Seyto and Rudy as well. So with that, I'm going to actually let you say a few things about yourselves. Let us know what you're doing now, what you're teaching, and just kind of what you're doing professionally at this moment. And we'll start with the GOAT, Rudy Richardson.
No. Oh, man. Thank you for that, for all that you said, and for how inspiring your words are to me. To reconnect with you this way, I never would have even imagined. And it has been such an incredible honor and pleasure to meet you again as this adult educator, professor, pastor who is doing so many positive things. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of this discussion with these two incredible gentlemen. After about 20 years of teaching in the Christian sector in Christian schools in Compton, went and kind of did music for a while. I toured and I played with a few different artists. Then I sort of ventured into the field of nonprofit organizational management. So now what I do is I am the musical director and the administrative manager of a nonprofit called Arts for Life Academy in Clearwater, Florida, which is in the Tampa Bay area. Our mission is to reinforce resilience, I should say, to life's challenges by enhancing education, promoting diversity, and developing life skills through cultural and performing arts for youth, for adults, and for families in this area. We definitely are an Afrocentric organization. We use some of the teachings that come from our heritage, our African heritage, especially our West African heritage, in the culture that we teach. We use these things to, we have an after-school program, for instance, in which we serve about 8 schools in surrounding areas, elementary and middle school. Many of our kids that have gone on to high school then come back and are trained to be youth specialists and counselors in our organization. We also do community productions, musical theater productions that are on a level you would think you were on Broadway watching a production. We bring professionals in to train kids for about 3 months, and then we put on this amazing production with them. During the summer, we have a summer program that runs all day long. In fact, we're in the midst of it now in a virtual sense because of COVID. And this is what we do. We find that working with at-risk kids here in this community, that this is a service delivery that works. It works well for me. As you know, music is one of my passions. So we are the organization is in its 30th year now, and I've been here for about the last 13. And we're just continuing to move on and to move forward. So I'm going to stop there and allow these gentlemen to talk about what they do. But thank you again for allowing me to be here.
Oh, thank you for that. You have not lost the beat. You have not lost the beat. How do we get this on the media feed? Because we need some W's right now in our society, and to hear about that, what you're doing, I'm just so thrilled. Seyto, go ahead and let us know what are you doing right now. I know you're preparing for the school year, of course, but give us more about what you're doing professionally.
Yeah, well, I'm not a lifelong educator. I was in for undergrad I studied computer science and went to work for Allstate Insurance. I was an application developer. However, there were several teachers in my family. My favorite aunt was a teacher. I'm from Panama City, Panama, and she taught on the Albrook Air Force Base in Panama. And from time to time, she would take me to volunteer with her in her kindergarten classroom. And that was like the first sort of like interest in teaching in some way. But my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, worked for the Panama Canal Commission, construction. He was like I think the first person who I saw as a teacher, because it was not a problem that he could not solve. Like I learned to do a Rubik's Cube because of this work ethic that he sort of instilled in my brother and I with problem solving. So I took that to computer science, and I was successful in that, but I didn't really feel like I was the line of sight between me and who I was helping seemed to be sort of clouded. I didn't see the end game in this huge organization. So my wife is a psychologist in the schools, and she thought, you know what, you should maybe consider teaching. I mean, something you thought about previously. And then so I revisited that idea, and then I went back to school, earned a master's, and then I started working as an instructional assistant in a kindergarten classroom. These kids would come in and they'd see me like, who's this giant? These kids are up to my knees. I'm on the floor with them, and I'm doing CBC words and all this stuff. And then eventually, I worked with the older kids, and then, but I found that 4th and 5th grade, it was something magical and sound cheesy, but there's so much wonder about learning in 4th and 5th grade, in my estimation. So I sort of landed in 4th grade, and being a male, I mean, so many kids come up to me every year. Mr. James, you're my first boy teacher. It's really, really funny. I'm the first boy teacher. And then the fact that I look how I look, and then I sound how I sound, and then I speak Spanish, and so when I've had the opportunity to have Black boys in particular, I haven't had many. I've got 3 this year. I can tell that they look at me a little differently because I'm going to frame their experience in some ways, going forward. So I challenge them, quite a bit because I found it was my experience that I didn't have Black male teachers coming up, and then later I wasn't able to articulate it in while I was going through it, but afterwards I thought, wow, they really lacked empathy, how they interacted with me as I thought about it, going forward. So that's something that's always in my mind about, what are the images these kids see? What are Black figures look like? What do they sound like? What sort of career paths do they have? What's interesting about teaching now is I tell my kids all the time, like, I'm not building robots. Like I really want to help you sort of craft how to think about things and generate your own perspective. So it's been a blessing. And I'm looking forward to it. I mean, I worked in the corporate world for 10 years. I haven't been doing this, too long, but I wish I would have made the transition earlier, but that's what it is. But yeah, I got, our school year started yesterday. So I'm on my lunch break right now to join the group, because I know they're going to be waiting for me at 1:00.
Well, God bless you, Seyto. I appreciate you taking the time. And
Yeah.
I think really, in my observations of you, watching you teach, that is a quality that is really something that you exhibit. I think that makes a difference. And I think it also connects to DeMetrius as well. So I remember having English classes with you, DeMetrius, in college. And you were both taking the class, but I could see you formulating, thinking about how you were going to just planning your teaching career. And to see you now doing it, just go ahead and tell us about your professional experiences as a teacher and what you're doing now.
Wow. Well, first of all, let me thank you, Joshua, for inviting me to be a part of this panel. And let me apologize to all of you. There's some construction work going on right outside that I can't really control. So forgive me for that little bit of noise. But at any rate, Josh, there's so much I can say about just my respect and appreciation, admiration of you, and how we met and the relationship that we had back in college, and just admiring you from afar all these years, keeping up with you through Facebook as well. But yeah, as Joshua said, he and I both were freshmen together at UCLA, and coincidentally, as two Black males, we both were English majors, and it just weren't very many brothers in the English department. And so to see him and to be able to go through that with him was very helpful for me. And immediately after graduating from college, I went back to my roots. I went back to where I grew up, which was Linwood, California, and began teaching there at the young age of 22, and started teaching 10th and 11th grade English. And I taught there at Linwood High School for 8 years, and really enjoyed it, loved it. And as Joshua said, yes, I did marry my high school sweetheart, and we decided to buy a home, and in order to do so, we had to move. And so we moved up to the high desert of Southern California, where we are now. We've been here since 2006. So I'm going into my 15th year here, living here in Victorville, but I teach at Apple Valley High School. And over the past 15 years here, I've been teaching English. I now teach 12th grade expository reading and writing, which is a college prep English class. But mostly, I run what's called the AVID program. AVID is not something that I created. It exists all throughout the country. If you're in education, you probably are very familiar with it. But I've been an AVID coordinator both at Linwood High School and at Apple Valley High School for the last 19 years. And as AVID coordinator, primarily my job is to help students who are mostly students of color, who would be first generation college students, and students who come from lower economic backgrounds, help them to be the best students that they can be and achieve academic success. And then at the 12th grade level, I help those students get into college. And so what Joshua has probably witnessed over Facebook with me is me taking my students to visit various colleges all throughout the country. I've done Black college tours in the South and on the East Coast with my African-American students. Every year I take my students to San Diego area, to Northern California. We go everywhere. And then eventually I walk them through the college application process and help them make their college dreams a reality. And so I've been doing that now for a total of, this is year 23. Wow, Josh, been 23 years. Yeah. So this is year 23. And I'm still loving it, still enjoying it. And we start school tomorrow. And so I'm excited to get started, even with these obvious challenges that we're going to have to face with going virtual. I'm expecting to still have a successful year. So, and thank you again, Josh, for having me on your panel.
Wow. Thank you for being on the, man. Like, do you see why I have this brother on the panel?
Yeah.
Right? Because there are a lot of African-American men whose experience in education is the opposite. It's not what you're doing, DeMetrius, in terms of going the extra mile to make sure they get it. People have experiences of the opposite, and to hear what you're saying, I'm so touched, and I'm just thrilled at the experience that they're getting. So hey, let's kind of take this back in terms of your motivation. So any one of you can jump in, and but I want to ask this first question: who or what inspired you to be a teacher? And I ask this saying, you all know the statistics in terms of just these low percentages of African American men teaching in education. So, like, how did you end up becoming one of those? If I could say it like that.
Well, my experience was a lot like Seyto's. When I look back, it seems like I was always groomed to teach from the time I was an adolescent. Growing up in New Jersey, my mom was a teacher. She was a preschool director. And during my middle school years, my summer job, my after-school part-time job was working as a classroom aide part-time for my mom in my mom's school. Later in high school, I was in a youth employment program where they trained high school students to tutor elementary school students in reading and math, both after school and during the summer. And also in my church, I grew up, I taught Sunday school. I directed and played piano for the youth choir. I had this amazing mentor, our pastor, Reverend Lawrence Roberts, who was one of the founding members of the Gospel Music Workshop of America. He was a phenomenal preacher, a wonderful teacher, a great musician, choir director, singer-songwriter. But he was my mentor and my musical inspiration and teacher. So everything that I know about how to work with kids and teaching songs and teaching choir, I learned by watching him and by being mentored by him. So I actually began teaching after moving to LA. And I grew up in New Jersey, I think I said. And there was a gentleman in my first teaching assignment at Redeemer Alternative School in Compton, Charles Graham. He had been retired from the school system, but he was working in this Christian school. And he taught me things like the importance of developing a stable and structured classroom environment. He taught me about my role as a teacher for both the kids and their parents, to be consistent in my service delivery and to be aware of the image that I projected as a Black male teacher, and to take that responsibility very seriously. So those are the reasons I think that I continued to teach. As I said, I taught for about 20 years in the Christian school sector in Compton. And I think it's in hearing, when you're doing the job, there's that immediate reward you get when you see the light come on in a student's eyes because of something that you've taught them or something that you've said. But years later, to have someone such as yourself and a few other of my students at First Christian who have reached out to me through social media and who have said similar things, it's like, wow. you almost don't realize the impact that you have until someone tells you later. So I'm very fortunate. Very fortunate.
And let me tell you, just first saying, half of it is just you being you. I think like you're not trying to do anything. Just you being a Black man in this space is
good point.
Right.
It's just like, whoa. So yeah. And it's interesting that your inspiration was another African American male who was doing some things related to teaching. Seyto or DeMetrius, tell us your story. Who or what inspired you to teach?
I think, like I said before, like my seeing my aunt, and most of the students who she had on base were white. So at that age, I'm not conscious of sort of the ethnic background. But then as I grew older, I began to learn that often if there was a well-spoken person of color, especially a male person of color who gave an opinion about something, it was often considered abrasive or challenging. But but there was a way to deliver what you wanted to say in a way that wasn't, but you're getting your point across. And I think I saw that in my aunt, and then I saw that in my grandfather with how he interacted with people. And as I grew older, it seemed like the Black male teachers that I saw in high school, to me, it was always like a PE teacher. Like I didn't have a teacher that was, teaching, English or history, something other subjects. So suddenly it almost like drives the mind that, well, if I'm going to teach, I'm in athletics, again, and that's not something that was something I wanted to replicate. I want my students to be able to achieve whatever they want to see, but often they need to see it. If they see a Black male teacher in these spaces, then they can, it sort of frames the lens through which they view the world. But if all the images, if all the stimuli is always, so we're not monoliths, we're not this just one thing. So I think that was inspiring to the notion, and I think Rudy mentioned it earlier, like when the spark goes off, like the notion that I can have a sort of influence on my student is a huge responsibility, but it is one that is inspiring. I mean, every day looks different to me, despite the routine that schools have. Every day looks different because of allowing, because I like for the flow of information, even in my classrooms, to be very bi-directional. Like with my grandfather, if I had an inquiry about something, it wasn't just like do it this way. It was always accompanied by some sort of exchange. So in these spaces, even in 4th grade, like I wanted to sort of develop that going forward, so they have it for 5th grade, and it's just good reasoning skills and tactics and strategies are applicable, and they can start very, very early. And if they can get it from someone that looks like me, and some kids may need to see that. It's not that I'm suggesting that Black teachers are better. I'm not suggesting that at all. But if you don't see them at all, then you wonder if there's any chance that you could aspire to. That's so my grandfather, my aunt, those sort of drove my decision.
Well, for me, it's interesting because I had a series of amazing English teachers from 8th grade all the way through 12th grade. Each year, it just seemed like the Lord blessed me to have these amazing teachers who just happened to be my English teachers. But it was particularly in 11th grade that I ran into a teacher named Mrs. Alice Campbell, who taught at Linwood High School, and she had an amazing impact on my life. She made me think in ways I had never thought before. She made me view the world in ways I had never viewed the world before. She opened my mind. The autobiography of Malcolm X, which changed my life. And she also was over a club on our campus, which was the African American Student Union, which, I had no prior experience with anything like that before, where she taught us to be proud of our Blackness. And so she just had a tremendous impact on my life. And it was at that moment in 11th grade that I decided I wanted to do for other kids what she did for me. And fortunately, or unfortunately in some ways, I ended up having to leave Linwood, and I moved to Carson for my final year of high school. And I ended up attending Carson High School. And while there, the Lord blessed me to have another Black teacher, English teacher again, but this time it was my first Black male teacher. And so it wasn't until my final year of high school that I ran into my first Black male teacher. And he had graduated from UCLA. He was a football coach at Carson, and he was an English teacher. And he just took me under his wing, and he said, I'm going to help you get into UCLA. And he did.
Wow.
And so he ended up helping me write essays for scholarships. He helped me do my college applications. And, between him, his name was Michael Williams, between Mr. Williams and Mrs. Campbell back at Linwood, they were my inspiration. Fortunately, once I became a teacher, I was able to visit with both of them and thank them for the impact they had on my life. And here now, 20 something years later, I still keep in touch with both of them and cite them as the reasons that I got into education. But I would also add, like Mr. Richardson, that the church played a big role in my career pursuits as well. I also was a Sunday school teacher at an early age, and that really sparked my interest in education. And I went on to pastor as well. So the church has played a major role in my development as an educator as well.
Wow, DeMetrius, as you share that story about your high school teacher in Carson, I mean, it's no wonder that you're doing what you're doing amongst all the other influences that you have. But when I think about particularly that Carson, the English teacher from Carson, what I heard from that and what I imagine is like, and the rest of you also said comparable things. It's like that teacher of color, that black teacher or that black male teacher is like, I see you. Right. I see you, brother. It's like, they may not be saying that, but I see you. And that as a student being able, like they see you, but then you also see you in them. Mm-hmm. And I want to, I'm going to ask this next question. But one of the things I've thought about is I think about the prevalence of white teachers in education. And sometimes I imagine, like, what is it like to be white and a student and just see so many people who look like you regularly? White women, white men, and just for that to be so prominent, what does that do to your psyche without even like thinking about it? And then to be an African-American student and then have to really look hard, especially, California boy, that's not the same as the East Coast. So it's harder to even see that. So I want to ask this question. Do you relate to young black male students differently? And if so, how? And I'll say black male or black students in general, but especially black men.
I meant to say earlier, I attended Morehouse, and so having no black teachers at all, and then you get to Morehouse and everybody,
everybody,
and they're at the height of their game. Like these professors, I mean, 95% of them all hold doctorates in their field. So they're looking at you with such like hopeful pride. You're coming in. So I think if you have someone with that level of academia and you're coming in, and Morehouse can be in a very intimidating environment, because when you get in, you think you're the guy in high school, and then you get to Morehouse and they're all alpha males, everybody, the students, the professors, so with that as your background, like you do not want to let these professors down. Like they are investing so much in you, and yes, it's a liberal arts college and it's a private school, but they have such high hopes for you, and that's driven, my experience. Like when I got to you're in an HBCU, and then you leave that environment, and then you're like, I went into corporate America, but I left, feeling the support and undergirded by all of my professors and what they've instilled in me, that when I see a black student now, a black boy in particular, because of the stats and because of what we're seeing, even currently, and obviously some of the stuff that's happening now has always happened, it's just being documented. I do look at them because I think in many cases, there's more at stake. I'm not conspiracy theorist, but just taking what exists in the world, there is a lot at stake with how they engage with other people. I mean, I went to a school in San Bernardino where I was working, and this teacher a white teacher came to me and said, when students get a little unruly, do you mind if I send them to you? And I said, sure. So that afternoon, there's a knock at my door, and then this beautiful brown boy comes in, and I'm like, okay. The next day, a different brown boy. And, I mean, it's like all of these black children were coming to me, and I would ask them.
I think we're laughing, Seyto, because we've all had that experience.
Yes. So I would ask the child, I'd say, you know what? Why are you here? Like, I love to see you, but I want you to come see me in the different circumstances. I said, why are you here? And the offenses that and these kids were in many ways very truthful to me. They had no reason to lie to me, but in many ways, what their offenses were I sat a certain way, or the infraction. Now, for that to mean that now you're losing instructional time, send them to the black teacher. It's as if like you've had the experience when there's a movie happening and the audience is mostly white and something happens in the movie and they all look to you like answer for the people. Like I felt that experience as a teacher. So they're being sent for disciplinary reasons to me. So I needed to use that space to be like, you know what are some things that we can do differently? I can't even change the psyche of that teacher, but to them, I can say, well, teaching them these skills to like how to engage. I'm not suggesting that some kids are thoughtless, but it seemed like it was a bit curious that all the kids that were being sent to me were all these black children. So that, I can relate better to them than a white teacher. And I'm not suggesting that the white teacher couldn't, but it requires some investment into them. And because I've lived this life, I know what's coming. So it happens early. These were third graders coming to me, fourth graders coming to me, So yeah, when I engage them, and it's not always. I believe in restorative justice. Like if someone's made a mistake, give them an opportunity to sort of work their way back. It's not so punitive all the time. So I am sensitive. But my level of expectation of them, and once the kid knows, kids do not want to disappoint you. That's been my experience. They do not like disappointing their teacher. And especially if that teacher has taken the time to invest in them and really be interested in who they are beyond the parameters of academics and content standards and stuff like that. I think it really means a lot to them.
Well, DeMetrius and Rudy, you both obviously relate to that. Tell me about some of your experiences related to the African American.
Well, for me, the way I've related to my African American students in particular, obviously I try to do the best I can with all students, regardless of their cultural, ethnic background. But yeah, I'd be lying if I didn't say that I had a special affinity for the children who look like me. So over my time, a few years ago, actually, for example, I went to my administrator and I requested that she would allow me to create a class of just predominantly black males, but really the athletes on our campus. I wanted to have the 10th grade football, basketball, baseball players because I knew most of them were black and Latino, and I wanted her to give them to me and let me have them for 3 years to help get them in a better place academically and see how many of them I can get into college. And fortunately, she agreed, and that was one of the greatest experiences of my career. It was very difficult, very difficult. 15-year-old boys, a room full of 15-year-old boys, athletes at that, full of testosterone, was very difficult, but it was one of the great joys of my career. And I'm happy to say that about 90% of them ended up going to a 4-year university. And some of them now are teachers and professionals, and they keep in touch with me. And so I do try to make a special effort to look out for my students of color, because I know that unfortunately in our society and in our schools, oftentimes, as Seyto was alluding to, one small infraction could mean that they can get written off by their other teachers. And we have to, I believe that as African-American teachers, and particularly African-American males, we have to make sure that we don't write our students off just because they make a mistake here or there. We need to make sure that we continue to look out for them and continue to be that resource for them while everybody else is, turning their backs on them.
Exactly. I totally agree with both gentlemen, Seyto and DeMetrius. I do have a particular affinity for our Black male students. I think it's because I was a young Black male student, and I remember being underestimated academically by teachers, or coming to the realization that I was automatically categorized by them before they even got to know me. So I remember in 6th grade, we were, there was a citywide, this was Newark, New Jersey, there was a citywide essay contest, and the subject was What America Means to Me. And I wrote this essay and I typed it because my mom had decided it was good that I know how to type. So she got a book from the library and I learned how to type. And so I typed it and I wrote it, and the teacher didn't believe that I had written it. And I was like, they said, nah, you didn't write this. Your parents must have written this. And so they actually had to have me write something in front of them in my own hand before they believed that it was actually my work. And I took that with me all of my life. And I understand that our boys are underestimated. Our boys are placed in a category before they get a chance. The gentleman talked about how because of the way that they look, their behavior is seen through a different lens. But again, I see myself in them. I've been there. I've felt that. I know what that feels like. And I've seen how, excuse me, the systemic labeling of Black boys is what causes the achievement gap between them and their white and Latino and Asian counterparts. It causes the cultural disconnect between them and their teachers who are not Black. There's a disparity, as the brothers have said, in the way that they're disciplined as opposed to other students. And there's a direct correlation between the treatment of Black male students and their being sucked into the so-called school to prison pipeline. So I believe, as DeMetrius said, it's important to focus on the potential of our young boys and not to look at every infraction or everything that they do as something negative. I love the way that you channeled all that energy in the room. I can only imagine you channeled that into a positive direction and got these young women to much more positive trajectory for their lives. I think that's amazing.
You know, I'm juxtaposing, you know, what DeMetrius had shared about in terms of like, let me have them. I want to invest in them. I believe in them. And then Rudy, your discussion of you writing this essay and it's like, I don't believe you. I'm not, this is not, and I resonate with that as just as a Black person in moments in when I'm just giving myself, and then there's this moment of, I don't believe you, or I don't think you're the person that you say that you are. You know, that's one of the things that motivates me in terms of engaging with students of color. I certainly teach in a context in which most of the students I teach are not students of color. Most of the students are white students, and I have a great time. I'm in a context in which I can mentor and what have you. And I've developed some rich relationships with students cross-racially, which I wouldn't trade for anything in the world. And at the same time, I don't get the opportunity in my context to teach Black students hardly at all. And I think about that. And I, you know, as my students, you know, I go back to the students who inspired this talk here, saying I'm the first Black teacher they've ever had. As a Black teacher, I'm like, sometimes I long for classrooms where I do have Black students, because my teaching experience is different. When I have, and obviously I teach in a college context, so there's discussion and what have you. So that's some of the dynamics I deal with. And I wish I had more opportunities like DeMetrius to say, hey, let me have them. I see them. I see their faces as they're walking along campus. I see the look in their eyes. I want to engage and give them a different dynamic. So talk to me about maybe some of the unique challenges, if you feel that way, some of the unique dynamics that go into being a Black male teacher in the context in which you teach.
Joshua, let me speak to something that you just said, though. I do want you to understand as well, brother, that I hear you when you say that you wish you had more Black students, because I can relate to that as well. The school at which I teach is not predominantly African-American. It is predominantly white and Hispanic. However, I've been very intentional about recruiting African American students into the program that I run so that I can help them be, successful and get to college. But in my role as an English teacher, the majority of students that I have in my class, my college prep English class, is usually white. And so I've also experienced that other end of the spectrum that you're talking about, where I'm the first Black teacher that many of these white students have ever had. And I want you to understand, Brother Joshua, that I believe that there's value to that as well. Us representing for these white students, being able to give them a different picture than what they've been told oftentimes by their families, by what they've seen in media, what they've seen in television and movies. Oftentimes it is just as important for the white students to have a positive Black male role model in their lives, so that when they leave high school and go out into the world, they will have a better understanding that I won't even say not all, that the majority of Black men are not thugs and gang members and or even rappers and basketball players, so the role that you're playing, Joshua, in the lives of your white students, I don't want you to underestimate that, because I think that's important as well.
Thank you for that. That's a good point. That's an excellent point. Seyto, Rudy, you want to weigh in on this?
Yes, I think it's one of the challenges for me has been, well, what I wanted is to recognize that there are definitely cultural differences between our young Black male students, our Black kids, period, and their instructors. You mentioned earlier, I think about 10 years ago when I was doing some of this research, about 80% of the teachers nationwide were white females. And it was like, that blew my mind. But that's definitely reflected here in Florida in the school system. It's definitely reflected in the ways that when we talked about how our students' behavior is perceived. One thing I know that you mentioned, Brother DeMetrius, athletics is huge here in Florida. This is something that is so supported by parents and by families. It's a big thing, football especially, more so than academics. But what I understand is there's a certain code of behavior that you have on your block, in your neighborhood. That's the way you have to be, but that doesn't always translate well when you're in a classroom. So cultural competency is something that I've tried to instill in these kids. It's like, yeah, there's a way that you act when you're at home and when you're on the athletic field or on the court, or but when you're in the classroom, there's another set there's another way to behave. It's not that you have to be fake. It's just being competent to realize that in this situation, these are the norms. And so that is a challenge to try to get across to kids. And especially, I'm so much older. I'm as old as most of their grandparents are older. And so to get them to really understand this is important and this is of value, to understand how to act and how to handle yourself in various situations. So it's an ongoing challenge, but I welcome it. It's a lot of fun actually when you see when you see these young men and especially begin to realize, hey, this works. There's some value to this,
Yeah, you're talking about is integral to their experience, and that will drive opportunity. And I think often some of the young students that I've had, may characterize the way I speak. And I think you know where I'm going with this, right? They may, and I'm like, the appropriate way to speak is irrespective of ethnic background. Now, like you said, at home we can hang and be a little looser. So getting them to understand that is not reflective of them being soft, because they're concerned about, you know, how this is going to make me look, you know. So I know that for me, some of the challenges might be like when we have like Black History Month, for instance. Like I don't observe. I mean, I understand the history of it, but I don't observe it in any greater regard in February than I do all the time. Like in my classroom, you're gonna see quotes every month. You know, something I write, you know, daily, because I don't want it to be just isolated to like February per se. So sometimes, especially at my site right now, there's 27, 28 teachers. I'm the only Black male. You know, there's two other male teachers, 3 teachers, 2 are white, like probably north of 50, close to 60, and then the PE teacher who's a young white guy. So I find that they figure, well, here's you know, Mr. James, and you know, he's a person of color. Often feels like they're going to put like undue pressure, but much like, you know, Brother Holmes mentioned, I welcome them sending them to me if them sending that child to me is going to in some way protect their spirit, their outlook on life, then I'll take them. And that's not being noble, but rather I know labeling children is I mean, it has drastic effects, especially for our Black and brown kids. So if that's my bag, then I'll take them, because I can in some ways try to instill value in them, celebrate, you know, who they are, challenge them, you know, when needed, but not discard them. And I'm challenging all my students, you know, equally. But often that can be a little bit of a challenge if their assumption is, oh, Black student, Black teacher, he'll do better, when most should be really just making an investment into any of their students. You know, so that has often been a bit of a challenge.
What I'm hearing from all of you is, you know, you're intervening. You've kind of alluded to it only briefly or subtly, but you're intervening in terms of people eventually going through the prison industrial complex. I mean, you see the trajectory that leads there for some, and your intervention can be the difference. And I hear so many things, we're all hearing so many things now in the media with respect to, you know, different sides of the political spectrum and explaining, you know, why Black people are in the predicament they're in. And some people's argument as well, you know, Black people are just committing more crime. So, you know, and obviously we know there's way more complexity to that than simply saying those things, and a recognition that there are dynamics and contexts that kind of set people up for trajectories way down the road, and that we can be there in the educational system to intervene with that. I'm going to go back to what something DeMetrius admonished me on, and I thank you for that with respect to the impact we have, even if we're not in a context where we're predominantly teaching students of color or African-American students, the impact we can have on students who don't look like us and don't have our backgrounds. I'll share a brief story, and then I'm going to ask you a question. Certainly, I've had those moments where I teach. I have students that we build great bonds. I connect with them, and some of them really, you know, they're like my kids in terms of mentoring them and shaping them into adulthood. So I really value those connections I have with them, and I do have examples of that. There's one example I have that's not so much from my formal teaching, but when I was volunteering with my children in their elementary school, and I was helping with, I think my son was in the first grade at this time, one of them, and we were in a reading circle, and I'm volunteering as a parent. I'm reading a book, and there's this one student. She's not African American, but you know, I'm kind of introducing myself to the kids. I'm like kind of shaking their hands or what have you. And she didn't want me to touch her. She was like, you know, like, okay, that's all right. I'll go ahead and read. But you know, I think it was some weeks later I come back, and I had volunteered. Sometime I'm a musician myself. I played my saxophone, different things like that. I remember going to the classroom, and I see her, and she looks at me, and she's like, she stretches out her hands like this and says, "Huggy, Huggy." Like, I was a little concerned, like, can I hug her? I don't want to be, you know, but it was cool. I gave her a hug, and it was just the transformation, her connection with me. I don't know. and she's a first grader. I don't know when in her life she'll have that kind of relationship with an African-American male. But the impact that I know I had on her life, and to your point, DeMetrius, those moments are happening. So this is my next question. And so we talked about the challenges. What do you think about, or what are the most rewarding experiences you've had as a Black male teacher? You've alluded to some of them, but can you highlight one or two of them that you think really represent your experience?
Let me jump in because I have to leave. That bell you heard earlier is because I have to start my new Zoom in a couple of minutes.
Sure.
But this has been a really, really awesome, conversation. Mr. Richardson, I've only known you for the last, 56 minutes, and I can see how you inspired this guy. And DeMetrius, what you shared is really inspiring to me. I'm on the earlier end, teaching. This is a 4th year coming up. But in terms of what's rewarding to me is even seeing the kids, just even in 5th grade, referencing experiences they had with me the previous year, or hearing at a parent conference talking about, some influence that I had on their child's organizational skills or thinking about a problem. So those things are, you can see them really quickly, at least at my level in 4th grade. So that's very inspiring, that choices that I make, which makes me very cautious about what it is that I'm doing and how it is that I'm influencing my students. So I'm constantly sort of reflecting what it is that I'm doing and how it's going to help them along their educational journey to 5th grade, to 6th grade, onto high school. So my hope is that I've been able to inspire some sort of intellectual curiosity as they navigate these spaces that may or may not always look like them. And with that, I wish I could stay, but my call is about to start. So it was a pleasure. Joshua, thank you for having me here. Gentlemen, I would love to continue this conversation, perhaps in some other format, even outside of this webinar. But good luck with the rest of the webinar.
Pleasure meeting you, my brother. Take care.
Take care.
God bless you, brother.
Yes, thank you for taking the time, and you reminded us of the stark reality we're in, not just in terms professionally, but also the COVID dynamic, which I'll touch on briefly a little bit later. But thank you.
Sounds good. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Wow, my most rewarding experience has been reconnecting with you, good sir. And maybe this is not in the context of the question, but it's rewarding in a sense that you almost don't have any idea of the kind of impact that you have made, or the kind of just the kind of impression you left on someone until they tell you. So to hear that has been so inspiring. It has really been life affirming in a way, if that makes any sense. It's like, okay, that was an important time. And so with that, I want to talk about that experience and why that time of teaching, those 4 years that I was at First Christian, were very important. First of all, when I was hired as a first grade teacher, I didn't quite know what to expect. I had worked at that time as a classroom assistant for kindergarten, but most of my work were with maybe 3rd, 4th grade kids. So for first grade, I thought, okay, this is going to be a little different. Let's see how this is. What I did not know is what an awesome school First Christian was, and hopefully is. It was an accelerated program. So the kids in first grade were actually reading and comprehending and doing 3rd grade work. So that was amazing. And what that taught me was that there was unlimited potential in students, that you cannot say because a child is this particular age, this is what they're supposed to learn. There's unlimited potential. And it caused me to open my mind to different ways of teaching. And it excited me to the point that that's probably why I was able to get out there and just play ball with you guys. Plus I was younger. I can't do that now. I miss those days. But I enjoyed it so much. And I learned more about myself through you all and through that experience of teaching. So that was very rewarding. And the fact that several of you now have reached out and found me on social media and have reached out and have had similar good things to say. So that is rewarding in and of itself.
Wow, I'm touched. I'm touched to have known you and just to be part of your teaching lineage. And I take everything you've done with all the other inspirational teachers and do my best to impart that to my students, and hopefully have students come back to me 20, 30 years later saying the same thing. So thank you so much for that. DeMetrius, you want to share?
Yeah. It's hard to pinpoint just one or two, but I've been very fortunate, Joshua, that over the years, particularly with me working with the AVID program and, helping kids go to college every year, I would say on average, I help about anywhere between 50 to 60 seniors get accepted to a four-year university. And so over the years, now when I take my current students to all of these different colleges, I'm always able to hook up with former students who are there, who offer to give us a tour to campus or just to come and give words of encouragement to my current students. And so being able to pretty much go to nearly any university in the state of California and know that I have former students there who at a moment's notice are willing to come and help me out and talk to my students and just share their experience and give words of encouragement always touches my heart. One particular example, this past February, I took 15 African-American students on a Black college tour. And we spent a week going to Alabama, Georgia, Washington, D.C., Virginia, visiting all of the different Black colleges. And I was able to hook up with former students who are now about 30 years old, who graduated from Morehouse and from Tuskegee Institute and from Hampton up in Virginia. And it was just one of the highlights of my life to run it, talk to those students and see what they're doing now in their professional lives, and to have them speak to my current students about the impact that I had on their lives, apparently. And then one other story actually was not an African-American kid. He was, I believe he was half white, half Hispanic, but he was a student in my English class maybe about 10 years ago. And he was one of the brighter students that I had, but he was extremely lazy. He didn't want to do his homework. He loved being involved in class discussions. He did the reading, whatever I assigned to read, he read. But when it came time to do the work, he was lazy. He didn't want to do the work. So at the end of the year, I ended up having to give him a D for the class. And it hurt me to do so, but that's what he earned. And so I gave him a D. He ended up, obviously, because of his overall GPA, he wasn't able to go directly into a four-year university. So he went to the local community college, which is Victor Valley Community College here in the high desert. But I kept in touch with him because I really believed in him and I enjoyed him. And I ended up hiring him to come back to the school as a tutor for my current students. And so he worked for me for 3 years as a tutor. And once he finished at the community college, I was able to help him transfer to Chico State University, where he completed his education. And now he's working as a high school teacher. And so he contacts me and we hook up he comes back to town to go to the football games, or he'll come back in town and we'll have lunch. And he constantly reminds me or thanks me for, even though he got a D in my class, he thanks me for not giving up on him and keeping in contact with him, giving him that job and helping him get to Chico State, because now he is serving as a high school teacher himself, doing the same thing for other kids. And so that's one of my success stories that really reminds me, why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Wow, you just have your inspirational stories. Wow, you need to write a book with your stories. They really, really are rich. I mean, I'm touched by that. I mean, and what I'm hearing and I think from all of you to some degree, is the level of persistence that you have as a teacher, knowing who you are and having maybe a more intimate sense of what your student might be going through. That, as you mentioned, DeMetrius, you got to do what you got to do as a teacher in terms of your grades, but you don't have to give up on him as a person. And I think that's what happens in the educational system. Okay, there's what you do in class, but then I'm still with you as a person. And when a student feels that, they will continue to persist if they know you believe in them. And you're seeing the fruit of that. That is amazing. And so I think what I want to do now, I want to ask one more question and then open it up to the other questions. And speaking of persistence, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the reality of the pandemic and the COVID and just how that's impacted you as a teacher, teaching now, engaging with students, and the kind of persistence clearly you and the students have to engage in. So anything about that, in terms of mentally, emotionally, physically, just how you're navigating that as a teacher?
Well, one of the things about our summer program is that it's very hands-on, very inclusive. In addition to music, it's singing and actually instrumental music. We teach all forms of dance. We have ballet, we have modern, we have African, we have hip hop. And there's also fine arts. We have different teachers who come in to teach various classes. So because of COVID, they haven't been able to do that. So we've done a lot of virtual classes, which has worked well for us. We weren't sure if we were going to be allowed to open, but we did. We opened on June 1st. So far, so good. We haven't had any situations. We haven't had to close. We had a smaller number of kids than we normally would have. So it's been easier to manage the COVID guidelines. But we've also learned some different ways of service delivery. We understand right now in Florida, I don't know, I think in California too, there is this, are you all opening? You all are opening, and are you guys, is it a choice or is it going to be virtual? I'm not sure.
It's going to be 100% virtual.
100% virtual. Here, parents have been given a choice. And many of our Black parents in our community have really no other choice but to send their kids to school. But they are doing this. There is I think they have 9 weeks for the first, I guess, first half of the semester, the first 9-week period. They're able to do virtual and then reassess after that time. But some kids are actually going to school. So we will have a program, but again, we will be doing a lot of we will be not having a lot of teachers to come in to teach, but teach virtually. One of the things we noticed about the virtual classes were the kids related to it very well. And I thought about it, it's like this generation is so used to doing everything on a screen that they just adhere to it. And they had to, for instance, in dance classes, they had to have social distancing between them. They had to wear masks, so they couldn't really do a lot of talking. They couldn't really touch each other and mess around, and they were kind of like focused on the instructor. The classes went very well. So who would have thought? I really feel for teachers in school districts where they're being forced to go back. I understand that there are health issues to consider. So it makes sense to do everything virtual. It just makes so much sense. I don't know if we're looking at the future of the school of education. I don't know, gentlemen, but we shall see. But it has worked for us. For the first 2 months that schools were closed, we did a lot of our work from home. But we went back to the physical plant in June, and it's worked so far for us. Again, I don't know how it's going to work. We're going to see what happens once school begins here. But I suspect that in California, where it's 100% virtual, it'll be a lot easier. I don't know. What do you think, my brother?
Well, yeah. Unlike Seyto, I'm not a techie type guy. And so it's probably going to be more challenging for me than for my students. Like you said, Mr. Richardson, most of these kids, this is all they know, you know. So they're very adept to using technology. I've gotten used to Zoom over the past 5 months and using things like Google Classroom and but it is going to be a transition for all of us. But the key word that you said, Joshua, was persistence. Yeah, we're going to have to persist, and we're going to have to push forward and find ways to, you know, kind of reinvent education so that we can still be successful. With my program that I run, my AVID program, a lot of what we do necessitates us being there in person. But before I got on this call, I had a meeting with my team of teachers who teach this program with me, and we were just discussing what changes we're going to have to make, you know. So, for example, one of the big things we do, as I've been alluding to often, is these college field trips. Colleges won't be receiving students for campus tours for a long time, but we're just going to have to take them on virtual tours, you know, and I'm still going to do what I do with my 12th graders come September and October, help them through the college application process, fill out their FAFSA forms, find and apply for scholarships for college. That work has to continue, and we're just going to have to do it virtually through Zoom. But that is the role of every teacher. You know, we got to find a way. And, you know, I'm confident that we will.
Yeah, I think you all said it. We do have to rethink education, and perhaps it's an opportunity in terms of there are things we'd like to address with our communities that perhaps as we're rethinking education as a whole, that we'll be able to do that more effectively. And I think with people like you all, I think we're in good shape with respect to that. And at this time, I'd like to open it up for questions. So I'll invite Connie back to give us a sense of what people have been asking and how we can engage with that.
Wonderful. I just want to say how amazing the panel has been. The responses have been wonderful, and you are all so inspirational. So we've had tears, we've had laughter. It's just been wonderful listening to all of you. You have no idea how much you've inspired us. So one of the questions is from Maisha, and she asks, as Black male educators, why do you believe male educators are underrepresented in the field of education?
I'll let one of you start and maybe I'll follow up.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Richardson. Go ahead.
That's a very good question. I don't know. I think that the experience that Dr. Joshua mentioned and DeMetrius mentioned, that they knew and they were geared to want to become educators. When they entered college, they knew that this was the field that they wanted to go into, that they had been inspired to do this work. It's kind of a unique experience, I think, among African-American males, among maybe males in general. We're taught a different way of thinking in terms of career, in terms of goals, in terms of business, in terms of what success actually looks like. It takes a special kind of person to want to do this job. It's not an easy job. The rewards are not measured in money, in finances. It's measured in your overall compassion for youth, for young people, or whatever level you want to teach, just for imparting knowledge. It is a service more so than a job, you know, and hopefully we can inspire more men to want to do this. And I think that maybe traditionally it has not been a field that men in general and Black men in particular have decided that they want to pursue. I don't know, brothers, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think that generally speaking in our country, education is a field that most people characterize as, feminine work, and which is ridiculous and far from the truth. Um, Both men and women can be successful teachers. As you said, it just depends on the type of person you are. But unfortunately, I do think that um, young men are not taught, uh, culturally speaking and societally speaking, to be compassionate, to put others ahead of themselves. We are taught that we should go after jobs or careers where we can make a lot of money. And although I don't believe, going into education, you're going to be poor or broke, but you're also never going to get rich in this field. You have to be motivated by something else. And unfortunately, we don't raise our boys to take that approach in life. But as you said, hopefully that can change, and that hopefully that will change. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much it. Josh?
Yeah, I think both of you have made great points. I think the first thing that comes to mind is the imagery of success for an African-American male that is put before us from very early. I mean, they don't use teachers to market tennis shoes. They just don't. So I think when you're just looking at the images out there, it's like, I'm an African-American male. What does it look like for me to be successful? There's some easy images that come out, and I don't take anything away from sports because I think there's some fantastic things happening. In fact, I think some of our teachers are in the sports industry as coaches, and may he rest in peace, Kobe Bryant. I mean, like, he was a teacher, right? He just was in sports, and so I think there are these professions that they're presented as, sports or music. They're presented as our way out, if you would. But I think the same kind of excitement as we've all talked about can be experienced in our profession. So some of it is marketing, quote unquote. But I think we need to represent, and I think also rethink the profession in many ways, so that it accommodates the way Black men like to think of themselves. I think just in the same ways that African Americans, when they go into different fields like sports or music, and they shape it to be in on terms that reflect them. I think the educational system has ways or has opportunities to be impacted by the culture of the people they need to attract, and one of them is obviously African American male. So,
absolutely.
Cecilia asks, do you think that now with the racial climate being what it is, that this can be an opportunity to talk about racism in the classroom to white educators? Do you think it would make a difference? And have you had the opportunity to do so?
Yeah, you said to white educators or to white students?
White
educators in particular? Yes, I do think that this is an opportune time to talk to our fellow educators about racism in the class and in the country as a whole. There are different curriculum that's being developed. There is even a Black Lives Matter curriculum that I've had the opportunity to take a look at, that I'm going to use. I'm expecting to use this year in my class. But definitely this is the time for us to expand our curriculum. I'm very proud, for example, of my son who's going to be attending San Diego State University in a couple of weeks. The Cal State University system decided to include as a mandatory requirement for graduation an ethnic studies class that every student has to take. And so that is a great, I think, addition to their educational experience at the CSU. I definitely think that we should look to do things like that at the high school and the middle school, and even the elementary level, making sure that we include curriculum that gives our students an opportunity to discuss their feelings about what's going on in this country right now. I believe that education is the main vehicle that can change the world. And so we definitely have to get our white colleagues on board with doing this, because obviously there's not enough of us to do it on our own.
That's awesome. I just want to say my daughter is a San Diego State grad. So it's very, very cool.
All right.
One of the things that we enjoy in our agency is a close relationship with the schools that we serve. We are actually located, our site is right between two different elementary schools. And we actually do outreach to them. We actually go in and teach art classes or performance classes in some of the schools. But one of the things we have is a great relationship with the principals of these schools and with many of the teachers. In fact, our tutor this summer was a teacher from one of the elementary schools next door to us. And we do have this opportunity. So I do think this is a wonderful opportunity to even develop that relationship even further, to be that organization or that group of professionals that can forge an even stronger bond with the teachers at these schools. And I like what you were saying. I think this is a perfect opportunity to develop some dialogue between these teachers and ourselves, because most of these teachers do not live in this community. They come to teach from other communities and teach in this community. One of the really good things that happened during COVID was meals were being distributed at one of the schools right here for kids, and for kids during the time that they were out of school, during the summer as well. So we've had this bond with many of the white staff, many of the white teachers, for doing these outside of the school kinds of things to forge a bond in the community. But I do believe in what you're saying, Brother DeMetrius, that this is the perfect opportunity to help to educate some of our coworkers, some of our colleagues, and help them to gain some insight into just what our kids are actually feeling, what our kids are actually thinking. And this would help in terms of the way they approach educating our kids. Good point. I like your point.
Yeah, I think this moment gives us a great opportunity. On the one hand, our nation is divided racially, but I also think that there's an openness there. And I think, we all know, every white person is not exactly the same. And I think there are folks who are more resistant, but there are folks who are open and have been open. And I think that this moment is creating that opportunity. I have to vouch for my own colleagues in my department. After the George Floyd incident, my colleagues, most of whom are white, took some initiative in terms of engaging in conversations with students and what have you. So I think that goodwill is there, even though the media doesn't always show it. And so I do think this is an opportunity to do that today.
Yes.
Another question, what do you think we can do as a society as a whole to change the culture and imagery of the Black male educator?
Wow, that's a good question. To change the imagery of the Black male educator. Well, I think Joshua kind of hinted at it earlier that, Black male educators are almost like a unicorn. A lot of people just don't think we exist. And we know that there aren't very many of us, but we do exist. And so I think we have to start as a community ourselves. We have to start teaching our children at an early age that going into education is a viable option for them. And that, although, as Joshua said, it's perfectly okay. I know I wanted to be a basketball player when I grew up. When I was a kid, Magic Johnson was my idol. And I wanted to be, the next Magic Johnson. But at the same time, because I ran into Mrs. Campbell and Mr. Williams when I got to high school, they blew my mind and they changed my whole perspective on life. And so I think at an early age, we need to instill in our kids that it's okay for them to pursue education as a career, just as well as becoming a doctor, a lawyer, a basketball player, football player, or a musician.
I was just thinking as you said that, Demetrius, that, well, my parents came up in the segregated South. And it was interesting because I'm not saying it was a great thing, but in the Black community at that time, all the teachers were Black and all the students were Black, and many of the teachers were male. And they lived in the same community. They had the same shared lived experience. They went to church together. They supported each other's businesses. They went to the same social gatherings. Many of the deacons and the pastors and the preachers in the churches were also school teachers. So you had this experience, and it was normal. I guess what I'm getting at, it was normal to see Black male educators.
You grew up in Wakanda, huh, brother?
My parents.
Okay.
My parents during that generation. And so I was born in the late 50s. I was born a few years after Brown versus Board of Education, when desegregation was mandated. And while on one hand, you know, it's the paradox. On one hand, it was great. It was a good thing for Black folks. But on the other hand, we saw the decline in that sort of care and concern of educators, of children being educated by people that were more like them and shared those common things. So if we could figure out a way for that to become normal again, for Black men to be in the classroom, to be seen like a normal thing, and not such a, my daughter actually called me a unicorn the other day. She saw a post and it said, when did you have your first Black male teacher? And she said, Dad, I thought about you. You're a unicorn. So if we get to that point where it's not such, it becomes a normal thing. You know what I mean? And not just the athletic coaches. Although I was in high school before I had a Black male teacher. And there were 2 PE teachers who were also health teachers, who were also coaches. And there were 2 who were both chemistry teachers. One I had for the lecture class and one I had for chem lab. And the chem lab teacher's name was Mr. Copper. Great name for a chemistry teacher. And but they each had distinct personalities. They were laid back. They were cool. They were great. In fact, one of them, my father passed away right in my senior year, and one of them reached out to me and became a great source of counsel and support. And that made a big difference. And imagine if I had been able to experience that all throughout my life, you know. So yeah.
Well, I'll have my thoughts, and this will probably be our closing thought as we're reaching to a close of our time here today. I would say that I think we just need to rethink education to be broadly. And I think there's probably no teacher around who doesn't think that education can be improved in terms of, like, I think really good teachers wrestle with, here's the heart of education, but then this institution doesn't completely accommodate all the ways I want to engage with students. And that's not a knock on our profession as much as, like, we have structures and things that just kind of work well and some that don't. And so I think about, like, if I had a chance to start from scratch and say, like, if I wanted to get multitudes of African-American men teaching, how would I present the profession? And I just think we need to go into a room and just kind of blue sky it and just rethink from that standpoint, which is something I hope to do. I'd love to create more platforms to expose the 2 of you and Seyto and other men like you, because it's so, I mean, people know this stuff happens, but I mean, when you guys are sharing your stories, it's like, wow. These are excellent reasons to become a teacher for anybody, regardless of your race, gender, or background. And so I hope I can get more exposure to all of you. I want to thank you for being on the panel. It's just been encouraging. I'm inspired. You've shared some nuggets with me. I'm going to take to the classroom this fall. And I want to just to everyone, we do this every month on a different topic. We're having another one next month in September, and with some wonderful dynamics going on with respect to things current in our society. So I want you to tune in for that. Like me on Facebook, go to the website, keep track of the seminars, the registration, follow me on Twitter, all those other kind of things. And just thank you for joining us today, all the participants. Love your questions, and God bless you. Be safe, be wise, be encouraged.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate you. Nice meeting you, Brother Demetrius and Connie.
Thank you.
Dr. Joshua, thank you.
Thank you.
God bless you.
God bless you.
Thank you.